All right, so this is the second virtual class for network scripting. And just to recap before we dive into this week, we talked a little bit, or we talked a lot last week around Ansible and configuring our CentOS system and our Ubuntu system to kind of talk to each other, to get communication between the two. We set up SSH, and we did a ping back and forth to ensure that we could connect. We also installed an application or an application server and tested that. Tonight is going to be a little bit more complex. We're going to go a little deeper. We're going to look at configuring our text editor, and I'll talk about that in just a few moments. We're also going to look at accessing multiple machines at one time or in a sequential manner. We're going to look at running playbooks on multiple machines. And then we'll wrap up with handling more complex deployments. So we're going to be looking more at the Windows system and also at the Ubuntu system as well. So for this week, the objectives, we're going to look at running playbooks again against multiple machines, hardening those machines, deploying applications, and creating playbooks. Kind of what we've been doing over the past several weeks. We're going to learn how to avoid repetition or repeating steps, wasting time, and sort of those mundane tasks that we have to do to create accounts or create services. We're going to create playbooks that we can just run one time to help us be a little bit more productive. A little more specifically, we're going to look at modifying our editor. We use YAML as our playbooks or our syntax for our playbooks. So let's modify our YAML or our editor to be a little bit more in line with how we do our YAML files. As I mentioned a few moments ago, even though we still use a text editor like VI or Vim or Nano or what have you for your text editor, you can still use those. However, what we currently use in our environments that we set up last week was VS Code. So we're going to go through and talk about configuring our text editor, but you may or may not use it going forward. But I still want you to at least see it and see how it works. So before we dive in, does anyone have any questions on this before we get started? All right, so if you haven't already, go ahead and get into your virtual machines. And I'll wait a few moments so that everyone gets in and gets those set up. I'll get mine set up as well. right, so I'll go ahead and launch our first instance. If you haven't already, go ahead and log in as your user. I'll wait on doing that before we get into it. So before we dive in, we're going to be working on guided practice 2.3. This guided practice is configuring that editor to utilize YAML files. And so most programming languages have a specific format and style. The one we use, YAML, is no different. And Ansible playbook files require a specific format in order to be processed correctly. I didn't go over it in detail last week, but you may have noticed before we ran our last playbook, we ran a command called -- syntax -check. What that does is it checks the syntax of the YAML file you're about to run to ensure that there's no defects or anything out of order. If it is successful, it returns back to the screen with the playbook and the playbook name. A good thing to know is a little time spent at the start of any development project to select and configure your editor, no matter what type it is, will let you focus on syntax rather than formatting. It will save you a lot of time and energy. So let's go ahead and get started. I will go ahead and log into my account. And so for this example, we're going to try and optimize our text editor to properly and easily format our YAML files. It's not going to be that way in VS Code, but it will be in our editor. So let's start off with our terminal. So I'll go ahead and open our terminal. And I want to see exactly where I'm at. So I'll look at my account and see where I'm located. We're going to go into our playbooks. So I'm going to navigate into playbooks. And I'll do a tree on that to see what we've got. Under week 1, you'll see we have 3 files: our Apache, our deploy website, and then our index.html. If I were to open, so I'm going to use nano just as an example, for week 1 deployment.yaml, you can hold down Alt, Shift, and 3, and that will give you the number or toggle the number lines on. If I do Alt Shift 3 again, it will remove those. Alt Shift 3. And then if I do an Alt P, as in Papa, it will toggle the display for non-printed characters. That can get a little overwhelming, so I tend to keep that off. However, for our first example, though, we do need to take a screenshot. So I'm going to go ahead and take a screenshot here of Nano with the characters and the numbers in place and paste that in chat for you. And I'll remove those. So anytime you want to make a change to your editor, Again, we're using Nano. So I will exit out of here. I don't want to save or change anything, so I'll just exit. Anytime you want to make changes, you always want to modify the file that does the configurations. For us, we're going to modify a file called nanorc. You'll notice there's nothing in that file. Well, we can set things in this file, such as auto indent. And then we can save it. And so if I do that, next time I open that file, it's going to read my changes. And always capture my changes. So what you'll see, when I exit out of that, I'm going to go back into Nano. And at that file level, I'm going to hit the Enter key. You'll notice it does the carriage return and sets it up at the exact same level as our cursor. Now I can remove that, come down, do it again, and it removes the same level. So we've set up auto indentation relatively easy. And all we had to do is create a file called .nano.rc. Any questions on that?
I have a question. Are you showing us an example that's different from what the guided practice is?
No, that should be the guided practice.
Okay.
Why was there something that was in there that I might have missed?
Some of the instructions are not clear on the guided practice.
Some of
Like,
them are not
Yeah,
clear.
yeah. As soon as we start, it just says keyboard shortcuts. It doesn't show.
Correct. So yeah, so if, that's what I was showing you. So as I went into that first file, so I went in as Nano, you can hold down the Alt, Shift, and 3, and it will add in the line numbers. That's a shortcut that you can use. You can also do the Alt P, and it will add in the white space characters. So those are shortcuts that it was wanting to show you before you make your official change, which is in the nano RC file.
I think the thing that threw, maybe it wasn't, threw people off. I know it did for me for a quick second, is that how you set up your files is completely different than what, at least for me, I had. So I was like confused what you were doing. But I figured out pretty quickly. I don't know if it's the same for everybody else.
You mean that right there?
Yeah, it looks different than what I have, but like I said, I don't know if that was the same for everyone else as it was for me, because it confused me for a second.
Let me take a look. Do you mind if I log into yours?
No, you're fine. I got what you're doing now. It just threw me off, and I was just saying I don't know if that was what was confusing other people.
Can you log into mine? I don't mind you looking at mine because I'm stuck on the part where we're supposed to put set auto indent in there.
Okay. Okay. So let me back up for a second. So under where I'm at locally is in my playbooks directory. There is a file that you can create at the home directory of your user. So I'll use the tilde to get back to my home directory. And I will remove that file. So we can add a file called .nanorc. And if I do nano.nanorc at the home directory of my user, we can set up different commands that will auto-populate our environment. So we can just do tilde /.nanorc to open it. And from there, we can do set auto indent, and we can add in set line numbers. And so then we can save that. By doing Control X. And then when we open, so if I go into my playbooks week 1 folder, I should be able to see that my number lines are already there. So I can exit out of there. And so that is really the setup for the guided practice for 2.3. That was to show you some of the commands you could run to do auto indentation, to set up the white spaces and the line numbers. And then the addition to that was to add the nano RC file to pre-configure some of those sets for you. Any questions on that?
Yes, could you look at mine again? I don't think it went through.
Yep, so I do see the file that was created.
Thank you.
Yep. Do you see what I did though? I went
No.
into
Mm-hmm.
Hey, so are you talking? If so, I cannot hear anything.
All right, sorry about that. Can you all hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. All right, so we logged into our Windows machine. The password for that is password1 with a capital P. We want to launch PowerShell because we're going to start off by looking at some of the privileges that we have. So we'll go to Start, to PowerShell. Instead of running PowerShell as a standard user, we're going to right click and go to Run as Administrator. And we're going to look at the execution policies that are available to us. And so that command is just get dash execution policy. So currently our execution policy is set to remote signed. Right, and so with remote assigned, the remote assigned is generally the default execution policy for Windows Server computers. It allows you to run scripts, but it requires a digital signature from a trusted publisher on that script or any configuration files that are being downloaded or used. What we want to do is switch this to an unrestricted mode. Unrestricted means we can run scripts or files or download files without a warning or worrying about it prompting us for that certificate. So we're going to use the set execution policy and say unrestricted. When you hit enter, it's going to say the execution policy helps protect you from scripts that you do not trust. Changing the execution policy might expose you to a security risk described in the About Execution Policies help topic at this web address. Do you want to change the execution policy? It gives you options. Yes, yes to all, no, no to all, or suspend. We're going to choose A for yes to all. Once that's changed, you can run the get execution policy again to see that it is set in unrestricted mode. So then we can take our first screenshot for this guided practice, which is to show the before and after of that change. All right, so our next section is we want to open So I can minimize this. We want to open the PowerShell ISE, which is the integrated system environment or the shell environment. So we'll go to Start. In the PowerShell ISE, we're going to right click, go to More, and Run as Administrator. What you'll notice is it gives you a list of all the commands that you might would want to use. So it's sort of like it is an IDE for PowerShell or for Windows administrators. The next thing we want to do is open a file that we have. So we'll go to Open Script. To the desktop. And you'll want to switch this to all files. And then open the configure remote for Ansible file. And so what this is doing is it will check for Windows remote management, basically a PowerShell remoting configuration tool. It'll check to see if it's available. If it is, it will continue and authenticate. If not, it will install it and configure it. So we will Control A to highlight that whole script. And we will say Run Selection. Once complete, you should see self-signed certificate generated, and at the very bottom, OK. Any questions on that so far? All right. So now let's switch over to our Ubuntu or our CentOS machine. So I will switch over to that. So for the CentOS machine, I went ahead and launched VS Code. All you need to do is go to Applications, and then so we're going to edit this host file. We're going to make some changes to it. The changes we're going to make another group called Win, and that one is going to be 192.168.1.2. We're going to change test group to web, and we're going to add one more feature to the Win setup. Since it's a Windows environment, we have to pass a few more things to it. So we'll say win, followed by vars. These are the variables that we want to pass through. So now we want to say ansible user is CIS 321, ansible password is password 1, the communication is going to be winrm, so ansible connection, and then we want to say ansible winrm server certificate validation, ignore. So I'll save that. If you do it through VS Code, remember we're not using sudo, so you have to hit retry as sudo and put in your credentials to save that file. So once we have configured our host file, let's test it. The way you would test it is by running ansible win ping. So the win portion is saying we want to use the win host group and we want to run a win ping. Since we have already specified the password, we should get a pong back. Any questions on that so far? All right, so we've been going for just a little bit. Let's take a 5-minute break, or let's take a 10-minute break to stretch your legs and get a cup of coffee or water. When we get back at 6:35, we will finish looking at our second or our last two guided practices. I'll talk a little bit more about that in-class activity, kind of give you a little more information around what we've been doing today, and then make sure you have everything you need for your performance assessment for the week. All right, so let's be back in about 10 minutes. All right, is everyone back? All right, so Daniel, let me look in yours real fast before we dive into the next guided practice.
I see you now. Thank you.
Yep, no worries. I highlighted it. I wasn't gonna say it out loud,
All
but
right,
you're good.
thanks.
No worries. Sometimes it's easy to see it from a second set of eyes. All right, so let's recap before we dive into the next two. We looked at Nano to do our sort of editor changes. We looked at setting up our Windows environment. Now let's take it a little step farther. We're going to edit our host file again, and we're also going to create some running playbooks that we're going to run on our Ubuntu machine and our Windows machine, or on our network from our CentOS machine. So we're going to look at the concept of groups. Up to this point, we really haven't done very much with the groups other than saying run all or run test group. Now we're going to go a little bit farther. So if you're looking at my screen here, you'll see we have our web group and we have our win group. We're going to modify this slightly. We're going to highlight our web group. We're going to duplicate that. And we're going to change the name of web to web server and the name of web to DB server. All I did, or what we did by doing that, is we have created 3 groups: a web server group, a database server group, and a Windows group. You can have more than one file or more than one IP address or host name in a group. For now, you can even have the same host names in multiple groups. Think of it in terms of Windows patches. Let's say you want to give all of the security patches that are up to date for this year, or up to this point for this year, to half of your user group. You can set up a group with all of those IP addresses in it, and you can hit run, and it will install it at those machines. You can also set up subgroups with just 10% of those to do the same thing. All right, so I'm going to save this. So go to File and Save and retry. All right, and so now let's go ahead and create a new file. So under our week 2 folder, I'm going to right click and say new file. And this is going to be called check website.yaml. Check website.yaml. So with check website.yaml, we're going to start off by giving it some information. Instead of saying all like we have previously, we're going to specify web server. Give it some tasks. It's going to be to ensure that the website is present and updated. The path is going to be HTML. The state is going to be a directory. The owner is root. The group should be root. The mode is 655. And we're going to say recursively check. And so this will log into that web server and check to see that it is running. Now we have to specify the owner and the group and the mode because we are going to sudo in and we have to ensure that we have the right permissions to do so. I'll save that file. All right, and so I'll navigate into my playbooks week 2 directory. And we can run ansible playbook syntax check. And if it is successful, we'll get a ping back saying it was successful. Then we can say ask become pass. It's going to try and sudo into that user, so we'll provide the user or the password. And you should get a successful attempt. So we'll take a screenshot of that. So we've got our first MySQL and start MySQL service for the daemon. We're going to say become is true. The hosts that we're going to use is going to be DB server. We could just as easily use the web server. It's the same IP address. However, we want to be a little bit more granular or specific in our task. So we're going to choose the DB server. Name is going to be install MySQL. And we're going to use the apt binary package or that package in order to do our installation. If this were Windows, we would use MSI. If it were a RPM or Red Hat based system, we would use Yum in that task. We're using apt because it is a Debian based system. So we'll say pkg equals MySQL server and the state. With the state keyword, you can actually specify the version of the MySQL instance you would like to run. By default, we're going to say latest. That way we get the latest patch sets. You could just as easily go out to the MySQL server website and find the latest or the version that you would like to run and specify that version, and it will install that version and run it. So we're going to say latest. We're also going to start and enable MySQL service. This one is going to be a service name. It's going to be MySQL. The state is going to be started. And we're going to have enabled is equal to yes. Okay, so we will save that, and I will navigate back over to our terminal window, and we're going to run ansible playbook MySQL syntax check. I mistyped it. Okay. Once it's successful, we can then say ask become pass. Give it the password. Oh, and I missed something failed on my side, so let me see what happened. All right, so it failed to fetch it successfully. Okay. SQL.server state equals latest. Okay, give me 1 sec, dude, to take a look at this. See what's missing. It's not liking the installation. Let's go with okay. So we're hitting an issue because packages have already been installed. So what I'm doing now is cleaning up our system. Did anyone else hit the same issue? If you did, put a thumbs up or say something in the chat. does look like it's running a little bit longer this time, so let's see if it finishes. Yep, and so it finished that time. If you run into the same issues that I did with the installation, what I ended up doing was logging in to the Ubuntu machine, so going to root, running apt-get or apt auto remove, followed by update. And then I was able to run my playbook successfully. It was a matter of the playbook or the environment was not ready to take that update. Once that's completed, you can go back into your Ubuntu machine and you can run systemctl status MySQL and see that it is running. So we'll go ahead and take a screenshot of that one. Any questions so far? All right, so the next thing we want to do is ensure that we can still hit our Windows machine. All right, so if we can still hit that Windows machine, I want to switch over to that machine. And we're going to create some new folders. You can do this a few different ways. You can do it from PowerShell. You can right click using the UI and create them. It's totally up to you. I'm going to use the way it says in the guide to practice. So in PowerShell, you can do new item. Type is directory ansible 1 and no output. And we'll do a second one, but this time I'm going to show you as it does it. So I switch that to Ansible 2 and I'll hit enter and you'll see the second one appear. Next, let's add a new file inside of Ansible 1 saying hello Ansible world. Ansible 1 Ansible test.txt. You see the new file. We can even look at the contents of that file. All right, so now that we have built our structure, let's switch over to our Ubuntu machine again. So in this one, we're going to say host is going to be our Windows machine. Our tasks are going to be to copy a file. We're going to use the Windows copy command. Our source is going to be C ansible 1 ansible test.txt. Our destination is going to be ansible 2, and the remote source is going to be yes. Any questions so far?
No.
All right. So now that we have that copied, let's go ahead and run this. So in this example, we're going to check the syntax. And then we will run it. And so just to show you how it works, we do want to see that it was successful. So I want to take a screenshot of that. But just to show you that it was successful, as it happens, on the left-hand side, I have our Ansible 1 folder. On the right-hand side, we have our Ansible 2 folder. I just ran the same command again. Watch what happens when it finishes for Ansible 2. It automatically added that file over. And so then you can take a screenshot of that as well. All right, any questions so far? All right. So that is 2.5. We now want to shift over into looking at 2.6. However, I do feel like I'm kind of breezing through this a little bit too quickly, so I do want to pause and ask if anyone has any issues or questions, or would you like to get caught up? Because I have been going through this relatively quickly.
I have a question. Do you post the recording right after class is over usually?
I post it as soon as it's finished rendering, yes.
Okay.
Yep. So that kind of tells me that I'm going a little too fast.
It's all right. I got behind a long time ago, so I'm gonna have to catch up. It's okay. If I have questions about the assignment I stopped at, I'll send you a message.
Absolutely. Don't hesitate. Okay?
Thank you.
All right, so
Excuse me.
yes, sir.
I'm having very bad connectivity issues. I don't know what's going on. I can't even get like my documents to load. So I'm gonna, whenever these are uploaded, I'm gonna knock them out once my internet is better. Because I can't even get on Teams.
Okay. No worries. All right, so let me pull this one up. So in the last guided practice for this week, we're going to be looking at handling more complex deployments. What we'll be doing is looking at installing other things on the Windows and the Ubuntu machines using sudo capabilities. It's the same sort of scenario that we were working with previously. We're just going to add in more complexity or more steps. What do I mean by that? I'll show you this one before we dive into it. Before we actually start working, you'll notice we're going to make another change. If I can highlight it, to our host file. We're going to add another group called complex1. With complex1, it's going to have just the 1.3 address, or the same Ubuntu machine that we previously had. We're also in the playbook right below it for counting processes. We're going to use two different hosts. This is something we have not done up to this point. Up till now, we've either used all hosts or we've used a single host. We can use multiple hosts or more than one. When it's completed, you should see a series of numbers. And what that's going to show you is the actual running processes for those environments. Now, if you'll remember, going back up, the first one says complex1. That is showing it for the database or the Ubuntu machine. Localhost is actually looking at the machine you're currently on. That would be your CentOS machine. So let's go ahead and take a look at these. So I'm going to go back in here. I'm going to dock that machine back so we can see it. All right, so I'll close that out. And under week 2, I'm going to choose new file and say count processes.yaml. We're going to start with our beginning header. We use our hosts, complex 1 and local host. Now, I'm not going to add that to the host file just yet. I'll do that before we run our playbook. We're also going to specify the remote user. Up to this point, we haven't done that either. The remote user allows us to tell the hosts which user we're logging in as. So when you run ask become pass, that flag, it's assuming you're running as root or as the admin user. If you specify a remote user, you don't necessarily have to do that portion. Especially if you have the token in place or the key in place, it'll just automatically allow you to connect without asking for that password. And so this is where you would put your username, the tasks that we're going to perform, and this is going to get very granular, so bear with me as I walk through this. So we're going to say count processes running on the remote system. We're going to be using the shell, and under the shell, we can tell it to do a command. So we're going to say show the processes, but get a count of those processes for us. Well, once we have those processes or the count of the process, we need to be able to store that information somewhere. As I mentioned earlier, up to this point, we haven't done this, so let's talk through it. Once we have that information, it can respond back to the calling machine or the calling program. We can then take that calling information, capture it, and register it to a remote or to a registered identifier or variable. We can also print the remote running processes. And so in order to print, you'll use the debug feature. And it's going to be standard outputs. Now, you'll notice for the message, any message going to standard output to the console or the CLI is going to need to be formatted in or converted into a string. That's why we have those single quotes around our variable. Now you'll notice the two curly braces to the left and right. That is denoting that it is a variable that we're using. Next, we will do the same thing for our local system. Account processes running on the local system. So we're going to use the local action. Instead of shell, we're just going to use the local action. Well, it is also shell. Register that. Processes number. And then we will print local running process number. Debug again. and standard output. And so I'll save that, go File, and Save. So again, what it does, or what's it doing, it's taking these two hosts, and it is, for the remote, which is complex 1, it's running a shell command to get the word count. We can do the same thing here. It's just a word count of 4. We have 4 running processes. It runs 4. And then for the local, it does the same thing, and it will print out the local environment as well. So we'll clear, and we'll do an Ansible playbook. Syntax check. It's going to fail on me because I did not specify complex 1. So let me go do that in the host file. Complex 1. So I highlighted it, I copied it, pasted it, and then I changed the name from DB server to complex 1. So now I'll check my syntax. It was successful. And then I will run my playbook. One thing you need to remember is when you run the counting processes portion, it may not always be the exact same. Because at any given point in time, processes are starting up and shutting down, starting up and shutting down. So if I were to run this again, it may be totally different numbers. It may be the same numbers, but it may be different. So just bear in mind, if you run this, they may be different. And so we'll take a screenshot of that. Any questions so far? So let's go ahead and create a few more files. This one is going to be called conditional vim with when. What we'll be doing here is we'll be checking our Ansible file or we'll be checking our environment to see if the Vim editor and Notepad++ is installed. If they are, we won't do anything. If they're not, then we're going to install them. We're needing to go back into our host file. And we're going to create a new configuration called complex 4. Okay, so I'll save that. Complex 4. Also say remote user. Going to be your user. The tasks going to be print the Ansible OS family value. And this is a value that is automatically generated or a variable that's automatically available when you run Ansible. It automatically associates that value. We're also going to ensure that the visual editor package is updated on Red Hat machines. State is going to be latest. Say become is true. We're going to add in another feature called when. When the Ansible OS family is equal to Red Hat. Ensure Vim package is updated on a Debian machine. State's latest become true and only when Ansible family is Debian. And then finally, download Notepad++. We're going to use Windows for this one. So get URL. URL is going to be https github.com notepad plus plus releases, download v8.5.8, npp 8.5.8.installer .x64 .executable. The destination is going to be C Ansible 1, and this is only when the Ansible OS family is equal to Windows. Let's check that playbook. All right, so let's take a look at it one more time before we run it. So we've created a new host. Inside of our tasks, we are displaying the value of what we're on. And then if it is Red Hat, we're going to install Vim's latest. If it is Debian, we'll do the same. But if it's Windows, we'll install Notepad++. Okay, so let's go ahead and Ansible playbook. Additional. Ask, become, pass. I mistyped it. So it skipped Red Hat altogether. Unexpectedly closed. Okay, let's see. I might have missed something. Installer. Sorry, that's my fault. And I mistyped it. All right. And so if we went into our Windows machine, let me take a screenshot of this. If we go into the Windows machine, you should see that it was downloaded. All right. Next, we're going to install Apache on a Windows instance. So we'll create a brand new file called install Apache Windows or Win. Name install Apache. Win tasks. Name, we're going to create a directory. We need to be in a shell to do that. So make dir ansible examples. The args or arguments, executable. Also going to download the Apache installer. So that URL is https archive apache.org distribution httpd binaries win32.25-win32 x86 no SSL. The destination is going to be C Ansible. And then we will install it. We'll use the win package. And the state is present. Let's take a screenshot of this one. Do a syntax check. Okay, and then we will playbook install Apache. All right, and so that should have installed Apache. I'll take another screenshot. And so then we should be able to go into our Windows environment. We should be able to navigate to the C program files x86, Apache Foundations, bin, and we should see that file right there. So I navigated to the directory. To see that file. Show you how I did that one more time. See program files, x86, Apache, bin, and then from there, -v. All right, so just to recap, we have installed Apache on Ubuntu and on Windows. We've downloaded Notepad++ on Windows. We have made sure that Ubuntu and the local host were updated with Vim. We have copied files from one folder to another using Ansible in a Windows environment. So the one thing I want you to know is when you start looking at your performance assessments tonight or later on, everything that we have done up to this point can be found when you utilized when looking at your performance assessment. Everything that we did, you should be able to modify in some way, shape, or form to do your performance assessments. Any questions on what we've kind of talked through? So what does it mean for us to harden a machine? If I were to say, I want you to harden all of the workstations on our campus network, what would that mean to you?
Scanning the network with a vulnerability scanner, and from those results, looking at the vulnerabilities, possibly doing a port scan as well to see what ports are open and closing and fixing any vulnerabilities, then implementing some type of HIDS or some type of yes vulnerability software as well for future continuous monitoring. I think that's about it.
Absolutely. That sums it up in a nutshell. It's looking at the posture around your security mechanisms to ensure that, like you said, the ports that are disabled need to be disabled, that the firewalls that are open need to be secured in some way, making sure that all ingress and egress to internet or wherever it needs to go are routed properly, and that you can minimize your attack vectors. If you were in desktop support and you were charged with working on building out or installing Notepad++ on your every single machine in your environments, would it make sense to go to every machine? And by the way, you have over 100 in your environment stack. Would it make sense to go to every machine to install them manually? Or would it make more sense to write an automated script?
Yeah, it would make more sense to write an automated script that actually puts it on the domain controller, and then it from there dishes it out to all the workstations the next time they log in, force them
Yeah.
their computers to do an update, and yeah.
Yeah, well, it looks like everybody's saying automated script. So a lot of companies use tools like Ansible to do this. Some use Puppet or Chef, or if you're a Windows-based environment structure, you may use SCCM to build packages to push those out. Or you may have a dedicated RPM mirroring system that you hand roll all of your security vulnerability checks so that you can automate those processes. The point I was trying to get to, and you all kind of you said that, was if you have to perform a task, it's far better to do it using an automated process if you have to do it over and over and over. All right, I think that's all we had for this evening. I know I talked a lot and we went through a lot of different things. Don't think that you're going to be able to digest all of it tonight. Take some time, go back through the video, go back through the notes, look at the guided practices again. If you have any issues or any questions, that's what I'm here for. I'm going to be here until probably 9:30 this evening. And then on Thursday, just like we did the previous Thursday, I'm going to be available. So if you have something you want to discuss or walk through, or something that just doesn't make a whole lot of sense, you may not be the only person. So don't hesitate to say it, to reach out. Because I'll compile a list of questions or issues, and then we'll just talk through them on Thursday. So like I said, I've been talking for quite a while. You may hear that I've lost my voice. I've been talking all day, so I apologize. But I just wanted to get through everything that we have for tonight. I wanted to make sure that you understood everything that we did, or that you watched me do in the guided practices, is almost, if not identical, replication of what you would see on your performance assessment. Now, there may be small tweaks and changes here and there, but for 98% of it, it will get you almost completely there. All right, so if no one has any questions, I'm going to stop the recording. And if you are on campus, you're more than welcome to head home. If you are at a home, you're more than welcome to hang around if you have questions or issues. If not, then I will see you on Thursday, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, you too.